Run away, gives her son to a stranger, but he was a billionaire and did something that shocked everyone. Rate my story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The fine rain stung the desperate woman's face as her bare feet slapped against the cold asphalt of the sprawling metropolis, New York City. Her torn and dirty clothes betrayed months on the run, and her wild eyes reflected the despair of someone with nothing left to lose. Beside her, a 4-year-old boy struggled to keep up, his little hands gripping hers tightly as if it were the last connection to the safety that no longer existed. She had escaped from prison just 6 hours ago, after serving 2 long years for a crime she never committed. 2 years away from her son, 2 years thinking about him every night, 2 years planning this moment. But now that she was free, the cruel reality set in. She had nowhere to go, no money, no one. Worse still, the distant sirens indicated that her freedom was just a temporary illusion. The boy tripped and fell on the wet ground, his sobs mingling with the sound of the rain that began to intensify. She quickly bent down, picking him up, feeling the weight of his small body trembling with cold and fear. Her tears mingled with the water that ran down her face as she whispered words of comfort that she herself didn't believe. It was then that her eyes met the figure of a man coming out of a fancy restaurant across the street, maybe a place like 21 Club. He wore an impeccable suit that cost more than she would earn in a lifetime of honest work. His perfectly combed hair shone under the streetlights, and his aristocratic bearing betrayed a life of privilege she had never known. He was the kind of man who frequented the highest circles of society, owner of a fortune built through generations of successful investments. Without thinking, driven by a desperate mother's instinct, she ran across the street. The man was adjusting a gold Rolex on his wrist when she approached, panting and trembling. For a moment their eyes met, and something inexplicable passed between them, a connection that transcended words and circumstances. With tears streaming down her face, she placed the boy in the elegant stranger's arms. The billionaire, completely shocked, automatically held the child, his green eyes wide with surprise. The boy looked at him with big, frightened eyes, but without crying, as if he recognized something safe in this unknown man. "Please," she whispered with a choked voice, "take care of him. I can't explain now, but I need you to take care of him. I'll be back when I can, I promise." Her hands trembled as she quickly stroked her son's face. "Be a good boy, honey. Mommy will be back soon." Before the billionaire could react or ask any questions, she disappeared into the shadows of the night like a ghost, leaving only the echo of her hurried footsteps and the subtle scent of her desperation in the air. He stood there, frozen in the rain, holding a child he didn't know, trying to process what had just happened. The boy remained silent, his small fingers clutching the lapel of the expensive suit. He didn't cry, didn't ask for his mother, just watched the man's face with an intensity disturbing for such a small child. It was as if he instinctively knew that his life had changed forever at that moment. For the first few days, the successful businessman desperately tried to locate any relatives of the child, or even find traces of the mysterious woman. He hired private investigators, made calls to hospitals and shelters, but all attempts were in vain. It was as if she had dissolved into thin air, leaving only the boy as proof that this surreal encounter had actually happened. The boy steadfastly refused to talk about his mother or any details of his previous life. He simply repeated with a touching conviction that she had promised to return. This unwavering certainty from a 4-year-old child began to stir something deep in the billionaire's heart, something he didn't know existed. Gradually, an inexplicable transformation began to happen. This fragile and silent child awakened in him a protective instinct that he never knew he possessed. The man who had always lived focused on spreadsheets, stock investments, and business meetings suddenly found himself worried about sleep schedules, balanced meals, and bedtime stories. His friends and partners were perplexed by the change. The man who used to work late into the night now left the office promptly to pick up the boy from the private school where he had enrolled him. His conversations, once centered on profits and dividends, now included accounts of the child's progress and small daily achievements. Weeks turned into months, and during this time, the boy flourished under the dedicated care of the man who should have been just a stranger. His nightmares decreased, his shyness gave way to shy smiles, and gradually he began to call the billionaire uncle. A word that sounded like music to the ears of the man who was belatedly discovering what it meant to love unconditionally. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the city, the fugitive lived hidden in the most dangerous neighborhoods of New York. She slept in temporary shelters, worked in precarious jobs paid in cash, always attentive to news reports about her search. But her heart broke daily when, through discreet observations and carefully collected information, she discovered that her son was well, healthy, attending a good school, and apparently adapted to his new life. The pain of being away from him was physical, a wound that bled constantly in her chest, but with each photo she managed to obtain from afar, with each report about his well-being, she became more convinced that maybe she had made the right decision that rainy night. Her boy was safe, loved, and had a guaranteed future, something she could never offer while being a fugitive. The first twist came when she discovered, through old newspapers found in a public library, that the company where she used to work as an accountant had connections with the businesses of the billionaire who was now caring for her son. The discovery left her in panic. Was it just a cruel coincidence of fate, or was there something more sinister behind that seemingly fortuitous encounter in the rain? The discovery of the business connections tormented the fugitive's thoughts during her sleepless nights in the overcrowded shelters. She spent hours going over every detail of that rainy night, questioning whether it had really been just fate that had led her to that specific man. The paranoia grew like a sinister shadow, making her question whether her unjust imprisonment, her escape, and even that encounter were part of a larger plan that she couldn't understand. Meanwhile, the billionaire faced his own dilemmas. 3 months had passed since the mysterious woman had placed the boy in his arms, and the transformation in his life was complete. His luxurious apartment in the heart of the city, once a sanctuary of order and sophistication, was now filled with toys, drawings stuck on the stainless steel refrigerator, and small shoes scattered across the imported marble floor. The private investigators he had hired couldn't find any clues about the woman's identity. It was as if she had completely erased her tracks, disappearing into a city of millions. But something inside him began to change regarding these searches. With each day that passed caring for the boy, with each smile won, with each "good night, uncle" whispered before bed, he wondered if he really wanted to find her. The fear of losing her again was almost paralyzing. What if she came back and took the boy away? What if she found out that he wasn't a suitable father? These concerns consumed him during the wee hours when he watched the child sleep peacefully in his room, decorated with children's themes that he never imagined having in his home. The billionaire's routine had completely changed. His mornings no longer began with analyzing financial reports and stock quotes, but with preparing breakfast for the boy and making sure his school backpack was complete. His business lunches were often cancelled to attend school presentations or routine medical appointments. His partners began to question his priorities. During a tense meeting about investments in cryptocurrencies, one of them commented sarcastically about how his paternal phase was affecting his focus on business. The observation irritated him deeply, but also made him reflect on how his priorities had really changed. The wealth he had accumulated over the years, his assets in dollars and diversified investments, all of that seemed less important now that he had someone to work for besides himself. The second twist came unexpectedly during an ordinary afternoon. The boy, who had remained silent about his past for all these months, finally began to talk. Not about his mother directly, but about fragments of memories that began to emerge during his games and drawings. He drew a woman crying behind bars, talked about visits in a place where people wore uniforms, mentioned a bad man who made mommy sad. These fragmented details began to form a disturbing picture in the billionaire's mind. The woman wasn't just a desperate mother, she had been in prison. This revelation completely changed his perspective on that rainy night. She hadn't abandoned her son out of irresponsibility or inability, but out of despair and fear. She had entrusted him with the most precious thing in her life because she had no other choice. The instant connection they felt at that moment took on new meaning. She had seen something in him that made her believe he would be a protector, not a predator. Moved by this discovery, he hired more specialized investigators, this time not just to find her, but to discover the truth about her imprisonment. The results of the investigations brought to light a sordid story of corporate corruption that shocked him to the core. The woman had worked as an accountant in a medium-sized company specializing in financial services. During a routine audit, she had discovered serious inconsistencies in the accounting books, suspicious transfers, ghost accounts, and an elaborate money laundering scheme involving millions in fictitious transactions. When she confronted her direct supervisor about the irregularities, she was summarily fired under false allegations of incompetence. What she didn't know was that her direct boss, an apparently respectable man referred to by the investigators only as the corrupt supervisor, had fabricated evidence to incriminate her. Forged documents, purchased witnesses, and an incompetent lawyer resulted in her conviction for a crime she not only didn't commit, but had tried to report. The third twist was devastating. The corrupt supervisor was a minority partner in several companies in the billionaire's investment portfolio. They had known each other for years, frequented the same exclusive clubs. Their families socialized at charity events. The discovery not only shook his certainties about the people around him, but also placed him in a morally devastating position. Confronting the partner meant exposing the entire network of corruption and potentially destroying part of his financial empire. His stock shares could plummet, his investment funds would be questioned, his reputation built over decades could crumble overnight. But remaining silent meant being complicit in the injustice that had destroyed the life of the woman for whom he had developed deep feelings, even without knowing her properly. For weeks, he struggled with this moral dilemma. His nights were haunted by the image of her running in the rain, desperate and scared. She had entrusted him with her most precious possession, and now he had discovered that, indirectly, he had been part of the system that had destroyed her. The guilt was overwhelming. At the same time, the fugitive faced her own challenges on the ruthless streets of the city. She worked as a cleaner in a public hospital, receiving cash payments that barely covered her basic needs. She lived in a tiny room in a dilapidated boarding house, where the constant noise and insecurity kept her always alert. Her discreet attempts to observe her son became more risky. She had discovered the school where he studied and sometimes hid behind parked cars to see him play during recess. Each glimpse of him was simultaneously a blessing and a torture. He looked healthy, happy, adapted. He wore expensive clothes, had new toys, smiled with a freedom she had never been able to provide. The fourth twist happened during one of these observations. She was hidden behind a tree when she saw the billionaire arrive to pick up the boy. The connection between them was obvious. The way the child ran towards him, how he squatted down to hug him, how they talked animatedly on the way to the luxury car. It was a family image she could never offer. But it was also at that moment that she was almost captured. A police car was casually passing down the street when one of the officers recognized her. She had only seconds to react, running desperately through the back streets while the sirens echoed behind her. The chase lasted almost an hour until she managed to hide in the subway tunnels. This experience forced her to move even further away, relocating to a distant neighborhood where the chances of being recognized were smaller. But it also planted a devastating seed of doubt in her heart. Perhaps the best thing for her son was really to leave him alone with the man who clearly loved him and could offer him everything she could never achieve. The decision to give up trying to get him back began to gain strength, fueled by the guilt of putting him in danger with her presence and by the growing conviction that he would be happier without her. This internal struggle would become her greatest battle, a silent war between maternal love and ultimate sacrifice. The billionaire's decision was made. After weeks of agonizing reflection, he knew he couldn't continue living with the truth he had discovered. The corrupt supervisor needed to be confronted, not only for justice, but for the courageous woman who had sacrificed everything to protect her son. During a sleepless morning, while watching the boy sleep peacefully, he made the resolution that would change their lives forever. The confrontation took place during a routine meeting at the corporate office. The corrupt supervisor arrived punctually, as always, wearing his impeccable suit and displaying the fake smile that the billionaire now recognized as a carefully constructed mask. For years, they had shared lucrative investments, dinners in expensive restaurants, and even family vacations. The personal betrayal hurt almost as much as the injustice committed against the fugitive. "We need to talk about the accountant you wrongly framed 2 years ago," the billionaire said bluntly, placing on the table the documents his investigators had gathered. The supervisor's face paled instantly, his mask of confidence beginning to crack like glass under pressure. The reaction was explosive. The supervisor initially denied everything, then tried to minimize it, then offered increasingly larger bribes. When he realized that the billionaire would not back down, his true nature emerged like a poisonous snake. Threats were made, not only against the corporate reputation, but against personal safety. "You have no idea what you're getting into," snarled the man he had considered a friend. "If you expose this, not only your fortune will be at risk, but also the life of that fugitive you want to protect so much." The fifth twist came when the supervisor revealed that he knew about the boy, about the emotional connection that the billionaire had developed, about everything. He had been watching, planning, waiting for the right moment to use this information as a weapon. "Did you really think it was a coincidence that she chose you that night? I made sure our paths crossed." The revelation was devastating. The encounter in the rain, that moment that had changed their lives, had been orchestrated by the man who had destroyed her life. The supervisor had found out about the escape, tracked her movements, and ensured that she was in that specific area when the billionaire left the restaurant. He had turned her despair into an emotional trap. But the sixth twist came in the most unexpected way. The boy, who had remained silent about specific details for months, finally spoke. During a casual conversation about his day at school, he mentioned drawings he had made of important papers that Mommy had hidden before going to the sad place. These drawings, kept carefully in his school backpack, showed surprisingly accurate details of documents that a 4-year-old child shouldn't be able to remember. When the billionaire examined the drawings more closely, he realized they were childish representations of bank statements, signatures, and account numbers. The mother had shown the evidence to her son, perhaps trying to explain why she needed to hide, perhaps as a form of insurance in case something happened to her. The child's photographic memory had preserved crucial details that could be the key to definitively proving the fugitive's innocence. Meanwhile, she faced her own battle on the increasingly dangerous streets of the city. Her new job in an industrial laundry was physically exhausting and mentally numbing. Her hands, once accustomed to typing numbers in spreadsheets, were now calloused and sore from constant contact with abrasive chemicals. The money she earned barely covered the rent for the miserable room where she lived, leaving only crumbs for food. The seventh twist happened when she discovered through conversations overheard casually between co-workers that the billionaire was actively investigating her imprisonment case. The news reached her in fragmented form. Someone knew someone who worked at the private investigation company. Someone had heard conversations about a search for evidence related to a corporate corruption scheme from 2 years ago. The discovery filled her simultaneously with hope and terror. Hope because finally someone with resources was fighting for her innocence. Terror because it meant he was putting himself in danger, confronting powerful and unscrupulous people who had already destroyed her life once and would not hesitate to do so again. Her first reaction was to try to alert him to the danger, but how could she do that without exposing herself? Any attempt at contact could lead to her immediate capture. So she made a desperate decision to watch from afar and try to protect him in the only way she could, remaining invisible but vigilant. For weeks, she discreetly followed their movements, learning their routine, identifying moments of vulnerability. She discovered where he took the boy to play on weekends, which routes he used to go to the office, which restaurants he frequented. It wasn't obsessive stalking, but extended maternal protection over the man who had become her son's father figure. The eighth twist came when she witnessed an attempt at direct intimidation. Suspicious men began to frequent the surroundings of the building where the billionaire lived, observing, taking notes, clearly planning something sinister. She recognized the pattern. It was exactly what had happened to her before her arrest. First the surveillance, then the planted evidence, finally the legal trap. That night she made the bravest decision of her life. She wrote an anonymous letter detailing everything she knew about the corrupt supervisor's methods, including locations of hidden documents and names of people who might have relevant information. The letter was delivered to the billionaire's office through a delivery service that did not require identification, something like FedEx or UPS. When he received the mysterious correspondence, he knew immediately who the sender was. The delicate handwriting, the precise information, the evident care in every word. It was her. She was out there, watching, protecting, fighting alongside him, even from a distance. The letter not only provided additional evidence, but also warned of imminent dangers and suggested strategies to protect himself. The ninth twist happened when the corrupt supervisor, realizing he was losing control of the situation, decided to force a final confrontation. He hijacked the original documents proving the fugitive's innocence, documents she had hidden before her arrest, and that were now crucial to the case. But in his arrogance, he made a fatal mistake. He underestimated the emotional connection between the billionaire and the child. The boy, who had developed a deep trust in the man he now considered his protector, revealed the exact location where his mother had hidden additional copies of the documents. It was a place that only he knew, a secret hiding place she had shown him as a game, without imagining that it would be crucial for his future vindication. The location was unexpected. Inside, an old toy that the boy had taken with him that rainy night, a teddy bear that the billionaire had carefully preserved for months. Inside the toy, protected by plastic, were flash drives and miniature documents that contained all the evidence needed to expose not only the corrupt supervisor, but the entire money laundering network he operated. The discovery completely transformed the power game. The billionaire now had enough evidence not only to clear the fugitive's name, but to completely destroy the criminal scheme that had ruined so many lives. But using this evidence meant putting both him and her in mortal danger, as the corrupt supervisor had dangerous connections and enough resources to eliminate any threat. The tension culminated when the supervisor, desperate, made his final move. He threatened to publicly expose the fugitive's location to the authorities, ensuring that she was captured and permanently separated from her son, unless the billionaire destroyed all the evidence and remained silent forever. The corrupt supervisor's final threat echoed in the billionaire's mind like an endless nightmare. Handing over the evidence meant condemning the woman he had learned to love in silence to a life of eternal escape. Keeping the evidence meant risking the safety of everyone he loved. But a third option began to form in his mind, a risky strategy that could save them all or destroy them completely. For 3 days and nights, he meticulously planned every detail. First, he ensured the boy's safety, sending him to stay with his sister in a distant city under the pretext of school vacation. The child resisted initially, sensing the tension in the air, but the billionaire managed to convince him that it was only temporary. "Uncle needs to sort out some important things, but I promise we'll be together again soon," he said, kneeling down to be at the boy's eye level. Simultaneously, through discreet channels, he managed to get a message to the fugitive. The communication was risky but necessary. He needed her to know that the final confrontation was coming, and that her participation would be crucial. Her response came in the form of a simple note left in his car. "I trust you. Do what is necessary." The 10th and final twist came completely unexpectedly. As the billionaire finalized the preparations for the confrontation, he discovered that he wasn't alone in his fight. Other businessmen and accountants had been victims of the corrupt supervisor over the years, but remained silent for fear or shame. The courage demonstrated by the billionaire inspired some of them to come forward, creating a united front against corruption. The decisive meeting was scheduled to take place in the company's main office, a controlled environment where everything could be recorded and documented. The corrupt supervisor arrived confidently, believing he had all the cards in his hand. He brought with him 2 expensive lawyers and an air of superiority that would soon be shattered. "Have you brought the evidence to be destroyed?" he asked with a cold smile, calculated gestures, and eyes that showed no remorse for the lives he had destroyed. "I hope you've made the right decision. It would be a shame if something happened to that fugitive or the child." The billionaire remained calm, his voice firm when he replied, "I brought something, yes, but it's not what you expect." It was then that the doors opened and entered not only the private investigators with recording equipment, but also representatives of the district attorney's office, forensic accountants, and, to the shock of everyone present, the fugitive herself. She had made the bravest decision of her life, to voluntarily surrender to confront her pursuer face to face. She wore simple clothes, but carried with her a fierce dignity that unjust imprisonment had failed to break. Her eyes met the billionaire's for a brief moment, and in that look was all the gratitude, love, and hope that words could never express. The corrupt supervisor paled instantly, his mask of control finally falling completely. "This is a trap. You can't prove anything," he shouted, but his voice trembled with despair. The documents from the teddy bear were presented, along with the evidence collected by the investigators and the testimonies of the other victims who had found the courage to speak. The confrontation lasted hours. Each piece of evidence was presented methodically, each lie systematically unmasked. The supervisor tried to deny it, then tried to blame others, finally tried to flee the building. But the legal representatives were prepared for all his reactions. His bank accounts were frozen, his assets seized, and his arrest ordered immediately. Throughout the process, the fugitive remained silent, watching justice finally being done. When it was her turn to speak, her voice was clear and firm. "I knew the truth would eventually come out. What I didn't know was that I would find someone willing to risk everything to help a stranger and her son." The process of legal release was quick, but the bureaucratic procedures took weeks. During this time, she remained in a safe house provided by the billionaire's lawyers, while all the documentation was processed and her innocence officially recognized. These were weeks of anxiety, hope, and emotional growth. The billionaire visited her daily, bringing news about the boy and updates on the case. Initially, formal conversations gradually became more personal, more intimate. They talked about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. She discovered that he had lost his parents at a young age and built his financial empire as a way to seek emotional security he had never had. He discovered that she had raised her son alone since he was a baby, that she had worked all night studying accounting to give the boy a better life. The attraction they had felt that first rainy night slowly blossomed into something much deeper. It wasn't just physical passion, but a connection of souls that had found healing in each other. He admired her strength and resilience. She admired his courage and generosity. Together, they discovered that true love arises not only from compatibility, but from the mutual choice to face difficulties side by side. When her innocence was officially recognized and all charges against her were dropped, she was finally able to see her son again. The reunion took place in the billionaire's apartment on a sunny afternoon that contrasted drastically with the rainy night of their first encounter. The boy ran towards her with tears of joy, shouting, "Mommy!" with a pure happiness that made all the adults present cry. But when she expected him to show resentment for the time apart, the child surprised everyone by taking the billionaire's hand and bringing him closer to them. "Now we are a complete family," he said with the innocent wisdom of a child who had found love amidst chaos. The following months were of reconstruction and mutual discovery. The billionaire helped her start over professionally, not as charity, but as recognition of her talents. She became the chief accountant of one of his smaller companies, where she could apply her experience and professional ethics without the ghosts of the past. Her competence and dedication quickly proved that his trust had been well placed. They married a year later in an intimate ceremony that celebrated not only the love between them, but the formation of a family that had been born from the most improbable circumstances. The boy was the ring-bearer, carrying the rings with a smile that lit up the entire room. During the honeymoon, while watching the sunset on a distant beach, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them there. "Did you ever imagine that that night would change our lives forever?" she asked, snuggling into his arms. He gently kissed her forehead before answering, "I believe that some people are destined to meet, regardless of the circumstances. That night wasn't just about despair. It was about hope. You saw in me someone you could trust, and I saw in you someone worth fighting for." The corrupt supervisor's company was dismantled, its assets sold to compensate the victims of his schemes. The money recovered allowed several families destroyed by his actions to restart their lives. Justice had been done not only for them, but for all who had suffered in silence. Years later, when the boy was already a confident and well-adjusted teenager, he asked about that rainy night that had changed everything. Sitting on the porch of their new home, a home built with love, not just money, the three talked openly about the past, the present, and the future. "Do you believe in destiny?" asked the young man, now mature enough to understand the complexity of that story. His parents looked at each other, smiled, and answered almost in unison, "We believe in the power of courageous choices and unconditional love. Destiny can create opportunities, but we are the ones who decide what to do with them." That family, born of despair and forged in courage, had proven that even in the darkest moments hope can blossom. And that sometimes the best love stories begin not with a romantic encounter, but with an act of absolute faith. The faith of a mother who entrusted a stranger with her most precious possession, and the faith of a man who chose to protect that treasure with his own life. If you enjoyed this wonderful story, please rate it from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important. And if you love beautiful stories, subscribe to my channel. I promise to make your day better with my videos.